What's up YouTube? Today we're going to look at gates and expanders. So these are almost like the opposite of compression. They work using similar parameters but in the opposite way. So I'm going to try outline that for you guys and show you guys a couple of cool techniques which you can use it for. So let's dive in and have a look. So if you haven't already, I would definitely suggest checking out my video on compression. There was, I kind of drew this little thing and explained everything that I think you need to know about the theory behind compression. So essentially, if you kind of understand threshold and the way that that works with the ratio and stuff like that, then this should be a very quick understanding for you. So an expander works in a similar way to a compressor, except the other way around. Instead of reducing signals that go above the threshold, it reduces signals that go below the threshold. So let's say, for example, this is noise in the signal, and you guys probably hear it's quite noisy outside because it's storming like hell outside, and the rain is beating against my windows. So I'm not sure if you guys can really hear. I generally use gates and expanders to reduce the amount of background noise when I'm recording my videos and stuff like that, because I don't have perfectly soundproof environment, of course. So I've actually been getting a lot of questions on my videos about reducing background noise in vocal samples and stuff like that, which I think is this is the perfect opportunity because obviously it's incredibly noisy outside, and I've already got this kind of like little waveform drawn out for you guys so I can show you exactly what's going on in the theory of the expander and the gate. So then I'll go into kind of using it on vocal samples and stuff like that. So anyway, expanders also have a ratio setting, and that then allows you to kind of reduce this volume similarly to how like a compressor would reduce the volume above the threshold. The expander then works below the threshold. And it also works on like a ratio kind of setting. So let's say, for example, these peaks are my kind of like loud vocal kind of like peaks, and everything below the threshold which we set, obviously, the higher you set it, the less kind of vocal peaks are going to come through. So, specifically with different types of recordings coming from different environments and stuff, you're definitely going to have to set that threshold depending on what the source is. But hopefully this will kind of help you understand exactly what's going on there with the expander. So you're attempting to kind of remove this kind of noise here and create a kind of cleaner sound overall, so that when you apply compression and stuff in the mastering stage or whenever, you don't get that kind of like I was explaining with the makeup gain, you don't get this noise here compounded with the overall mix. So you're attempting to kind of clean up each of the sources. It's also a cool way of kind of removing too much reverberation from a sound, or also kind of transient processing and stuff like that. But I'm not going to get too much into the kind of finer details in this video. I'm going to kind of just show you guys the basics, and then hopefully you can kind of throw everything together in the whole mixing series and get some inspiration to put your ears to the test and kind of fine-tune things yourself, understanding the kind of theory behind it rather than just me giving you a bunch of tips and tricks and steps. What a gate does is it removes all of the audio completely. So let's say, for example, I say a word and then the word stops here, and there's that background noise here. We're not using the expander anymore. What a gate does is every time the volume drops below the threshold, it just mutes it completely. So essentially, it's the cleanest way to remove background noise. However, it's often a little bit too clean. So, in examples like where you've got a lot of noise, like, thunder and storm outside, when my voice does kick in, you're still going to hear a little bit of that noise, and then it's going to cut out to complete silence. So I guess knowing the kind of theory behind it and choosing which one is going to fit your kind of task would help, would benefit, I generally end up using gates on kind of like voiceover and speech type of stuff, but expanders is a little bit kind of more musical, I would say, because you don't get that kind of sudden mute kind of sensation. But yeah, anyway, hopefully that helps you guys understand what's going on with gates and expanders. So firstly, the most obvious and common way that I use gates and expanders is to reduce background noise from vocal recordings and stuff like that. And this is particularly helpful for, especially when you're doing a lot of processing on the vocals. Say, for example, when you use compression, it could bring out the background noise. So it's helpful to, either use a gate or expander before that processing to, isolate just the parts of the audio in which vocals are playing. So I kind of want to outline that for you guys, and I want to show you a couple of ways to use gates and expanders. So here I've ripped an audio sample from a documentary. So anyway, this is the vocal sample that we're talking about.
So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy.
So as you can hear, the sort of vocal sound itself is pretty clean, but there's a lot of music and background noise happening in between these vocal parts, particularly like here and here, these kind of parts. And, like I explained in a previous video, using threshold for compression, gate works in the kind of opposite way. And I think using this kind of example is going to be very easily outline that for you guys. So for this explanation, I'm going to use the kilohertz gate. It's just very straightforward, and the GUI is very easy to understand. In the readout here, it's going to very easily outline that for you guys. Most DAWs will have a built-in gate. Cubase's one might be a little bit confusing at first because it's got the sidechain and stuff kind of defaulted. So anyway, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to use kilohertz gate, but like I said, you don't need this. I would say all DAWs have a gate that comes standard built in. So what I want to do is let's just actually set a loop marker over here to a point which is just that background noise. So you see when the noise goes slightly above that threshold, it cuts in again. And then at this point here, when it goes lower, it cuts it out completely. Unlike expander, which would reduce the volume, a gate removes all of that sound completely. So generally speaking, what I do is I'll find a section like this background noise section and fine tune this threshold so that it's capturing all of it and removing all of it out. See how we've kind of increased the threshold so that this peak is not peaking past that threshold at all in the background noise part. So now if we expand our loop markers,
because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution.
So there's still a few parts there, particularly here, I noticed that peaked over that threshold. That little snare hit in the music. So we can actually go back there and keep playing it while we tweak this threshold a little bit more.
Artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution.
You notice that it kind of cuts in very abruptly and disappears very abruptly. So that's where you would come into these sort of envelope settings and tweak these till you've got the kind of desired overall effect. So this would kind of depend on the source audio. If you've got a very singing oriented thing, you won't really need that very transient percussive attack. But with dialogue, often you do get that you do need that sort of effect for the sort of sound to cut through, if that makes
Shakespeare or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity.
So you can obviously hear that there is still that sort of music playing in the background while there is that speech happening, and that is pretty much unavoidable. But what starts to happen is when you layer it into the track, it doesn't become as noticeable. So in the silent parts of the vocal, that other audio doesn't punch through. And I'm going to show you an example with some processing and stuff, how it can really become a drastic difference.
So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy.
So when you start doing these like extreme distortions and compressions and stuff like that, those that background noise really does tend to come through. So this is an example when a gate is really, really powerful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what it sounds like really just, obviously this is extreme just to outline it, but it is a pretty cool kind of vocal effect. With maybe a filter or something, you could use this very much. It's very much a usable sound in Psytrance. But I want to show you guys the difference with and without a gate before this distortion. It really cleans it up, like very much so.
Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. That came before them, and a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. The public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. The public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. Build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. Public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. Of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. Then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think the domain isn't so healthy. Then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Is essential to creativity. Then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity.
So it really, really cleans up that vocal, specifically good for using before very heavy processing when you've got like music and stuff in the background. So for a slightly more subtle approach, then the expander is also a great option. What I can actually do is, just show you guys what the difference between a gate and an expander is on the same audio example that I have here.
Creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely... It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think.
So, like I was mentioning, gates and expanders are very similar to the difference between compression and limiting, whereas a gate has that kind of infinite reduction, whereas the expander allows you to choose the amount of reduction using a ratio setting. So here, for example, notice when it's all the way up to the top, it's very similar to how the gate was responding to the sound. And as you dial the ratio down, you can even see here on this kind of graphic readout, essentially what's happening with the sound. It's not going to be turned down all the way as it gets to below that threshold point.
Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential to creativity. Because in the public domain, we can freely build on earlier works. It's part of evolution. Think Mozart, Shakespeare, or Thomas Edison. But these days, the public domain isn't so healthy. So if artists build on the work that came before them, then a healthy public domain is essential.
So what are the major differences here? The expander, I would say, is more of a kind of musical response. You always get that kind of little bit of sound coming through. It's not that immediate silence which you get from a gate. So a gate is the type of thing that I use specifically for vocal dialogue, speeches, that kind of thing, to remove hum, hiss, background noise, little bits of music and stuff like that, or to clean it up before processing it further. The expander is more of a versatile tool because you can use it for, playing around with the transient response and dynamics of percussions, synths, and all sorts of stuff like that. So this is a very nice trick that I like to use gates and expanders for. I actually don't believe there is an expander built into Faceplant, but I think using the range over here, you're able to get a similar effect. So it doesn't reduce all the way down to infinite dB. So essentially what I like to do here is create like a saw kind of unison detune sound, apply some reverb, and then gate the tail away from the reverb. So you still get like the tonal qualities of the reverb, but you don't get that kind of like long echoey tail. And it's a great way of making like really huge sounding sounds, but they don't kind of clutter up the mix, if that makes sense. So just a quick example. And then I put the filter usually after the gate so that it doesn't change like the at what threshold the gate needs to be working, if that makes sense. So essentially how you set this up is, actually what I'm going to do is just remove the gate and then we can just add it again afterwards. It's a regular unison sound. You don't have to use faceplant for it, but like I said in many videos, I like the way that this is kind of like all-encompassing. It's got effects and everything, so I can kind of show you guys like an entire sound in a single instance of a plugin, and then, you know, supply that to my Patreons. So anyway, and then it's got like a huge reverb sound on it. But as you can hear, the tail does kind of like tail out for too long. So I like to use the gate, like I said, to reduce that. So as you can hear, you know, when tweaking the range slightly and kind of using it in expander mode, you're kind of getting a slightly more natural sound. You know, it's not cutting that reverb completely, but it also gives you a slightly different effect, almost like a sucking effect at the end of the sound. So I guess, you know, depending on what type of sound you want to go for, if you still want some of that ambience to come through, you know, if it's a bare part in your track or arrangement, then you may want to tweak that range and just let some of the ambience through from the sound itself, or, you know, use this creatively. That's up to you guys. Awesome. I hope that helped you guys understand gates and expanders a little bit better. Let me know what you think in the comments. If there's other techniques that you guys use these tools for, also let me know in the comments. As always, I'm going to be posting this, you know, very simple preset that I made to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. If you are wanting to grab that, then check out the link that's going to be on your screen at the end of the video. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel.